So we were talking before the show about like, all right, what are we going to talk about here tonight? And I think we all came to the table with the same topic.
Yeah, obviously.
Scotland.
Scotland.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
We have to talk about it.
Well, we were discussing it last night on the show. We actually had Tommy in Glasgow call in and kind of give us the, his pitch and from his perspective what things are actually like there, because it's one thing to read a news article, it's another thing to actually hear from somebody in Scotland.
Of course, yeah.
So that was cool, and at least from what I'm seeing on Drudge Report and on the internet, it sounds like even though right now it's midnight in Scotland right now, so the polls have been closed for a while there. I guess it's taking them some time to gather all the numbers together. I saw something about that there might be paper ballots involved in this, so it could be another day or two of counting, is what some are saying.
Oh,
hopefully
not.
it goes the way of Scotland, because I would love to see Scotland win this vote. I'm not for democracy or anything like that, but this vote right here gives me hope that New Hampshire one day can also declare independence.
Oh, that's what I've been saying. I mean, I was at work today, and it's great because I work at the Atlas Society as their intern, and so I get to actually talk to people that think like me all day, and it's awesome. So I can, openly talk about Scottish independence at work, and I can talk about, the fact that this gives me hope for New Hampshire, and my boss is like, that's awesome, and he's with me on it. It's great to actually be involved with people that think like I do, so that I can, I don't have to put it in the back of my mind during the day and not because I'm excited about this.
You should never censor yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that you should. I mean, I understand that a workplace can be a kind of a tricky environment for politics, but at the same time, this is big news, and there's nothing wrong with bringing this up at the water cooler or whatever, wherever people talk at work. Like, hey, what do you think about the Scotland secession thing? Have you heard about that? And just let people go and see what they say. I think that any chance you get to bring, and you don't have this chance because you're not working with average folks, but any chance you get to broach the subject of secession with family, friends, coworkers, do it. And this is a perfect excuse to bring the topic to the table and see what people think about it. Just throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate, though, in the time that I have, since I became a libertarian, I've either been working for the Libertarian Party of Indiana as their communications consultant, or then I moved here and I became the intern at the Atlas Society. So I've never really had to be in an environment where I don't, I feel any need to censor myself whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't have that at all. I work a day job.
In fact, I'm always the mild one.
I jack myself into the matrix 40 to 50 hours a week. Yeah.
So you're working at a retail job. I don't know if we want to get into more detail than that.
I manage something, but I don't want to go into that on the radio.
But that's the style of work. It's retail kind of work.
I manage, but yeah.
You're interacting with employees, customers, average folks. Has this topic come up? Has secession been a topic of discussion at all?
I'll be honest. I do. When it comes to my job, especially being here in the Free State Project and whatnot for New Hampshire, I kind of keep my my work life a little bit separate, a little bit. Like when I'm talking to people on the street or whatnot, or in a coffee shop or anything like that, like I don't censor myself in any way, shape, or form. Like I got a haircut today. I had a huge conversation about Scottish independence and New Hampshire independence while I was getting a haircut. Like, so I don't censor myself at all.
Was this with a barber that you dealt with previously, or was this the first time you sat in the
I go
chair?
to this regular barber shop, but it was a different barber, so it was a different guy this time. But it went over pretty well. He was kind of supportive of it. He's like, well, England, the UK is not going to have much money to fight all these wars. I'm like, I mean, they're not going to be able to steal from as many people, you know. But it went over really well. He seemed pretty supportive of it, and he was open to the idea.
Supportive of Scotland or supportive of New Hampshire?
He did not go against the idea of New Hampshire independence. It's like, well, that's consideration. It's an idea.
Of course, you're also in the awkward position of being the customer, right? And
yeah.
the business provider isn't necessarily going to want to upset the customer with their opinions and have you not come in again. So maybe he was being forthcoming, or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just being nice.
He could have been being nice, but we actually went down another rabbit hole in regards to vets and the wars and all that jazz. And at first he was pro-war, but then he's like, yeah, but they lie about getting into wars all the time, like the Gulf of Tonkin. I'm like, yeah, I know that. And he's like, why do you trust him now when they've lied before? And he seemed very distrustful of the federal government. So that was like a kind of a crutch I was using for New Hampshire independence.
So I've been on the streets doing handing out flyers for the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence, which is an organization. It's kind of a think tank group. They're not politics. They're not taking positions with candidates or anything like that. But their purpose is to get the idea of New Hampshire declaring independence, aka seceding, out into the people's heads.
I've done the same thing.
Oh yeah, we did that for the 4th of July.
Yeah, we went out the 4th of July.
How'd
it was
go?
amazing.
It was great because most people
so
were
receptive.
You don't sell it as secession, you sell it as independence
Yes.
and whatnot. But especially on Independence Day, it's very fitting
Sure,
to hand out independence literature about
we
New
did
Hampshire
that here as well.
Yes.
There was like a coordinated thing.
We try to get as many people on board as possible. I'd love to do something like that again because just the Scottish thing is like got me all like pumped up about New Hampshire independence and the idea that smaller areas can leave a larger group of people, known as the federal government, whatever government you want to say it, but a smaller group of people can leave the control of a bigger group. And I just love that idea that this is happening in our day right now, that this idea is out in the open and that we can talk about it and that we can support it.
When I've been doing the outreach for the New Hampshire independence idea, that concept, I've been really pleased with the reactions I get from folks around here. And I don't know if you experience the same thing.
It's one thing I've noticed from New Hampshire natives is that they really love New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most people that live here love New Hampshire more than they love the United States.
Yeah, they're really passionate.
They know
about
it's
it.
a special place. I think the only thing that the only exception to that statement is young people in New Hampshire. They haven't, like, if they've grown up here and they've never gone and lived anywhere else, then they don't really know what they have. Usually, it takes them having to move out, like many young people want to do, and go somewhere else, and then they realize how truly bad things are in comparison elsewhere, and many come back to New Hampshire knowing finally the value of this place. But the experience I had actually was at the county fair. I was also handing out these flyers because at one point we had been doing Bitcoin flyering for the most part, Bitcoin outreach at the county fair for 5 days straight. But on the last day, I had run out completely of Bitcoin flyers, so we just started to hand out flyers for whatever. And one of them was the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence. And just the instant reactions I got from people were so positive. I mean, not one real negative comment or anything like that. And like when I would when they would ask real quickly, well, what is this? And I would say, it's about New Hampshire declaring independence. Their eyes would light up, and they would look at me and say something to the effect of, yeah, that's a great idea. Or just some real short statement just indicating that, all right.
Who likes the federal government anymore?
The thing about New Hampshire is that it's a small state, and people think about it as a small state, and they love the idea of a small government. They like small here, and it works in New Hampshire. Like, this is the place, if we're going to see an independent state, it's going to be here in New Hampshire.
I hope it's sooner rather than later as well.
In my lifetime.
Secession is certainly on the minds of the Free Talk Live hosts in studio tonight and in the studio, including me, Ian, and
Rob.
And Lauren, Objectivist Girl.
Mark is somewhere in Vegas, and I sent him a message over Facebook late last night just to ask him a question about something, and he hasn't gotten back to me. So I hope that means he's having fun rather than has gotten in trouble in Vegas.
Oh, no.
So
Hopefully he's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I really haven't heard from him.
The cops are really serious out there, aren't they?
I know they arrested Pete Nademo a long time ago.
Yeah. I hear it's like really difficult to deal with the cops out there.
So share with us what you want to discuss here. Our toll-free number again is 855-450-FREE, and you can join us via Skype at Skype username LRN.FM. And also want to let you know about freedomsphoenix.com. That's where they are uncovering the secrets and exposing the lies every day at freedomsphoenix.com. Their readers are provided the detailed real news that lies between the lines of propaganda and the relationship we have with coercive governments. freedomsphoenix.com offers up-to-the-minute updates on the economy, technology, communications, and the rise of the police state. Go to freedomsphoenix.com. Get signed up for their free daily dispatch. That's freedomsphoenix.com. So we're just generally having a conversation about secession as an idea. Of course, the Scottish independence movement has really been pushing this idea forward, and they're not the only ones. As we mentioned last night on the show, there's a fairly big secession movement in Catalonia, in Spain, and there's some others. In fact, there's an article that the Drudge Report is linking to about 8 different so-called separatist movements that could be next. And then they go through, Catalonia, of course, is listed in there, and these 8 are actually all over in Europe. So it's not just Scotland that is considering the idea of breaking away.
Well, there's also the whole it's like 6-state plan in California too, isn't there?
Unfortunately, I heard that has not gone forward. The rumor is, I don't know if it's true, that they did get the signatures, but many were disqualified, so they are not going to be on the ballot. At least that's what I've heard. If you're in California, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, hopefully get onto another referendum next election season.
So speaking of those revolutions that people are waking up and trying to get independence, so I just restarted my show True Objective, and it's on LMR, and it's great. But
LMR is
Liberty Movement Radio.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they picked up the show, and it's Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But we want to do a show. We're talking about money right now, but right after our talk about money, we want to do an entire thing about revolutions in America, in the world. So revolutions of the world, and so we'll talk about Scottish independence. Even if they don't, end up getting independence and don't end up voting for independence, we'll still talk about it. And so there'll be like failed ones and ones that were successful, and Ireland over and over and over again. So
well, hopefully I don't ever want to see a violent revolution.
Oh no, I
anywhere
hope
on
not
the planet
either
anymore. Like I love seeing especially it was sad to see what happened in the Ukraine when that went too violent, way too violent. But for the most part, I love seeing how people are actually standing up and saying that they're no longer wanting to be associated with another control group over them.
Absolutely, and obviously, I would like people to take things further. Like if Scotland doesn't get this vote, if it's 51% that vote no, we're not going to leave. I'd like to see the other 49% do something more significant, like, all right, well, we're just going to personally secede. We'll just not send any money to the UK government, and we'll just keep it all here and spend it in our own communities. I mean, that's not likely to happen because people aren't willing to take that kind of risk, but ideally, that'd be nice to see because then it'd be done. Like if people would just simply pull their support, I don't pay federal taxes and I haven't for a decade. If people would pull their support from the organizations they don't want to be behind anymore, then it's game over.
Yeah,
yes,
at that point.
Exactly.
So actually, I've got a piece here from The Guardian at theguardian.com. It's live updates as they're calling it rolling coverage of the results as they come in. And so literally updates are being posted every 3 minutes here on this blog. Just the most recent update from 1 minute ago from political sketch writer John Crace at the Edinburgh Count. Waiting, he says, waiting. Politicians, activists, officials, and journalists, everyone was waiting. The most intense, engaged election campaign ever held in the UK had just ended, and no one was too sure how to fill the final hours of limbo before the result was announced. The main displacement activity was for everyone to ask everyone else if they knew what the hell was likely to happen. The honorary consul for Norway looked particularly lost. He said, "Do you know when any announcement is likely to be made?" he asked. He didn't look particularly happy to discover he might have to hang around until the early morning to hear the result. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Maybe I will come back." Things began to warm up a bit around 10:30, and again, right now in Scotland, it is about midnight 25. As the broadcasters shuffled the talking heads between themselves, Dennis Canavan, the new Labour refusenik turned independent, was in particular demand. Around the tables for Edinburgh West, where the postal votes were being counted, a yes campaigner was looking gloomy. He said it's 77 to 33 for the no's so far. It's about what we expected here, though. It didn't look that way. Not everyone was that subdued, though. A Pakistani Business for Scotland Yes supporter called Mr. Hussein came over, saying, "Who are you with?" he asked The Guardian. "Well, you've been very biased," he declared. "May you burn in hell with Scottish oil." With that, he flung his arms out and hugged me. "I came here from Huddersfield in 1969, and we're all basically the same, aren't we? Whatever the result, when all of this is over, I'm going to have a big party, and I'm going to invite you too. You've got to have a laugh, haven't you?" He seemed to be the only person in the hall feeling that way at that particular moment. Within hours, another 50% of the hall would be laughing just as loudly. A YouGov poll suggested it would be the no's. The YouGov poll he's referencing is the only exit poll that has been produced so far from Scotland, and it is showing 54% for no and then whatever the remainder is for
US. So you mentioned the oil. Did you know that Scotland has been drifting away from the rest of the UK? Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong line. So Scottish nationalists claim that the vast majority of the oil and gas in the North Sea rightfully belong to Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
It's Scotland's oil.
Now, what is England going to do if they actually do win this election? Are they just going to let Scotland leave?
Well, that's a big question, right?
With their oil?
And it's a big question, and it's also a similar question that a lot of people will ask when asked about the idea of a United States state leaving. Well, won't they roll in the troops? Won't there be an assassination campaign or some sort of wall be built?
Because the last time that happened here, almost 1 million Americans were killed.
According to the discussion that we had last night about this, word is that the Crown isn't really planning to do anything about this, but who knows? Who knows? I would hope that they they don't lay hands on, that they let them go, and ultimately, if we get to see this happen, then that'll be a big indicator as to what other countries might do. I know that Barack Obama had sort of hinted at violence if a United States state were to leave, like back when in 2012 after the election, Texas, there was this big push for Texas to leave. And the official White House response was, well, this was pretty much settled in the 1800s during the Civil War, sort of intimating at the idea of that they would get violent.
It's a vague threat.
Yeah.
I really hope nobody dies.
The toll-free number here is 855-450-FREE. That's 855-450-3733. It's anybody's game right now in Scotland, and we probably aren't going to know more until tomorrow at the earliest. More coming up. We're talking about secession. It's on a lot of people's minds, especially over in Scotland, where they are right now in the process of counting the votes. The expectation on voter turnout is very high. Of course, people are actually excited about this vote, considering it means something, unlike voting for one scumbag politician versus another scumbag
means
politician.
You might actually get rid of someone.
Well, that's possibly true, but it could mean, this means something significant for people. Replacing one politician with another, that happens all the time. It's very rare that you get the chance to actually vote for secession. And so as a result, lots of people are coming out in Scotland. We'll continue to give you more as we learn it. So Americans some of them are pretty excited about this. There's a story out of, let's see, this is slate.com. Entitled "Nothing Succeeds Like Secession." Oh, hey, there's somebody talking on my computer. People in the United States excited about this. David Weigel writing about people in the U.S. getting jazzed up about Scotland. Let's jump on a plane to Edinburgh, says Rob Williams. You and me, let's go. I was actually considering dropping everything and going over there to be a part of what's happening in Scotland. Rob Williams is a Vermont secessionist. As far as he knows, he's the only elected official in Vermont. He's on a school board who avowedly favors the state's divorce from the Union, a return to its pre-1791 status as an independent republic. The idea was starting to catch on in the Green Mountain State when George W. Bush was president. It faded after Barack Obama replaced him. The reasons were not mysterious. Then came the Scottish referendum. Secessionists like Williams had followed the Scottish National Party for years as it first won concessions, then elections, then the right to an independence vote. In the last month, polls finally showed the Yes campaign creeping into a lead. If Scotland could secede, why not Vermont? Or New Hampshire? Or Texas? Or everywhere?
Everywhere.
The Scottish referendum has really captured a lot of attention and helped make secession look like a viable and sexy alternative to empire and centralization, says Williams. We're not talking about secession in Yemen or Sudan or someplace Americans consider less relatable. We're talking about Scotland. Making secession sexy in the West is fantastic. If the Scots do vote to secede, it proves that some Western nation under the yoke of empire can exercise its sovereignty and choose to leave. Now, it's been a while since secession fever broke out in America. The media hasn't been particularly interested in it since brief periods after Barack Obama's wins, when polls could find nearly half of Republicans in Texas or other red states ready to secede. In 2012, 80,000 Texans signed a non-binding petition asking for secession. Coverage of this did not always mention that more than 26 million people live in Texas. Still, the reasons for Scotland's crisis are the reasons why perfectly normal Americans become convinced that their states should leave the Union. The reasons why it might fail are the reasons why the American secessionists are on a 149-year losing streak. I don't know what should be sufficient to really move people towards secession, says Kirkpatrick Sale. He should know his Middlebury Institute has held multiple conferences on secession, and he's published books about the idea, full of arguments that have bounced right off of the skulls of average Americans. And I mean, the author here seems like he's not really a fan of the idea of secession, and there's no doubt it's not an easy pitch to pitch people on leaving the Union, on leaving the United States. There's been a poll done as of 2013 that shows that 17% in the United States would vote to secede and form a new state. 17% of American adults, according to Rasmussen, say they would vote for their section of their state to secede and form a new state. Now, that's not exactly what we're talking about when it comes to Scotland.
It's at least a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction, but I would love to see more about more questioning, more polling done about the actual question of, let's see what people think about leaving the entire Union, leaving the United States, and going complete independent mode. I'd like to see polling results for that. I'd like to see it for all of the U.S., but I'd also like to see it for New Hampshire specifically.
I think it'd be high in New Hampshire.
I would love to see polling data for New Hampshire. I don't know how we could get that done, but we should do it.
You can hire polling companies to do this sort of work. I don't know what it costs. I imagine it's $1,000 or $2,000 or something.
We could do a fund. I mean, the FSP can do like.
Well, they don't want to be associated with that.
No, they wouldn't do that. But
for a polling for independence.
Well, there are people within the Liberty movement here who do have access to machinery like poll calling things, auto callers, auto dialers, and things like that.
I know people like that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's possible we could get it done. You just have to get the list of the numbers to call, and that's probably the trickiest part, is acquiring the list of everyone's phone number in New Hampshire. Of course, the tricky part with phone polls is if you don't have people's cell phone numbers, then you're relegated to calling people with landlines. And if you're calling people with landlines, you're probably reaching people over the age of 50 rather than younger people.
Yeah, most polls aren't that accurate to begin with. Because I don't even have a landline. I haven't had a landline in 5-6 years.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, people who are in the younger two generations, Gen X and the millennials, I bet you 90% of them don't have landlines. Yeah. And the other 10% probably have it at a business or something like that. So back to the story here from Slate. So it's a good starting point, as you were saying during the break, Lauren, that 17% saying that they favor the idea of at least seceding and forming a new state is a great point to begin a conversation.
Yeah, what I was saying is it's not going to get any lower. I mean, that number is only going to grow. There's no reason. And if Scotland actually gains its independence, we're going to see, if we do a poll right afterwards, it's going to soar. I mean, if this doesn't go violent, and I really, I've got my fingers crossed.
This meaning Scotland?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it doesn't go to violence, if they get independence and then there's no violence afterwards, which is a big if. Mm-hmm. But, fingers crossed.
A lot of people over here if it doesn't go violent.
Yeah.
It's certainly something worth watching.
Yeah, but we'll see those numbers rocket, because if it's done successfully and peacefully, oh my gosh.
That's true, because it becomes real for people then. It's not pie in the sky fantasy. It's not this unbelievable concept. It's tangible. It's reachable.
At least here we're fortunate because we're surrounded by liberty activists that all want New Hampshire independence. So
I'd say most of them do.
Most of them do. Yeah, it's not like we're not alone by ourselves. Like Michigan or California or Oregon or whatever should secede. Here a lot of liberty activists we support New Hampshire independence. And if you feel alone, come help us out and support New Hampshire independence.
Yeah, absolutely. Get to New Hampshire.
It doesn't surprise me that it's Scotland. At all, because I know that Rob, we talked one time about we've got a decent following in Scotland with both of our podcasts.
Yeah, we did a show about Scott Coin, and we kind of blew up for a while.
And I've done an interview.
It was a crypto show in general, but Scott Coin came up in conversation.
I was on Greening Out podcast, which is based in Scotland, and I don't know if Free Talk Live has a big Scottish following, but there's definitely libertarians over there. There's definitely people. So it doesn't surprise me that it's Scotland. In fact, I'd be surprised if it weren't Scotland.
We'll come back with more. There's more to the Slate piece about the secession movements in the United States. We'll come back with their thoughts and yours as well. It's Free Talk Live. Bring up anything. Now, I knew I had seen, we're talking about secession, Scotland, etc.
Yes.
I knew I had seen numbers previously, and I pulled up the secession poll. The first number that Rasmussen reports here on is, and this, by the way, poll was from September of 2013. The first number they report on is that 17% of American adults say they would vote for their section of their state to secede and form a new state. But later in the polling results, on a broader scale, says Rasmussen, 21% of Americans think that states have the right to leave the United States and form an independent country, which was the issue that we really wanted to know about. So interesting that more people say that states should have the right to secede versus 17% saying that they would vote for their state to become like the 51st state or something like that.
I think it's one of those things where it's kind of like, I mean, you ask older individuals and they're just like, yeah, you have the right to,
but they wouldn't vote for it.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that, but I understand that they have the, I think it's begrudgingly accepting.
Either way, it's still 4% of a difference, and that's not a statistically significant percentage.
Still about a fifth of the entire country.
I mean,
that's huge.
Yeah. That's
so wait, hold on. So 80%, I'm sorry, 79% are ignorant of the fact that we can secede? That's sad.
Well, 21% think states have the right to leave the United States. 59% don't think states have the right to secede. And all the evidence is that they don't, right? Like, I mean, that seems like an obvious question.
It's in the New Hampshire Constitution. It states
the right to revolution, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can make that argument.
Yeah, and
that's not true with a lot of states.
I believe it's in most.
I don't know if that's true. I think New Hampshire's Article 10 may be a fairly unique article to New Hampshire. I don't know how many other states have something similar. I suspect it's not very many.
Well, you can make the argument that at least with the colony states that they did form the Union, that they can leave it. You can make the argument that states that outside of the Union, they were formed after the Union was created. And Texas was formed outside of the Union, so you can make that argument that it could leave. But definitely New Hampshire and other former colony states could, theoretically make an argument that they formed it. Why can't they leave it?
The logic makes sense. The answer, of course, is the men with guns may try to stop them. But 59% you've got that don't think the states have the right to secede. That leaves 20% that are undecided. So you got 21% saying, yeah, states have the right to secede, and a whole other 20%, they're not so sure. And you were talking about starting with that 17 or that 20% of people. Well, then you've got the undecided 20%, which, those are fence sitters. They're persuadable. And that's a possible 40% right there. And then, of course, as the idea becomes more popular, what we saw happen in Scotland over the last year was the polling results on the question of should Scotland leave the UK. The gap was closing. It was a fairly strong majority that was against them leaving earlier in 2014, and ever since then it's just been closing over time. So popularity is a big factor.
All you need to do is build up momentum. If you have a good idea and you can sell it well, whether it's like something social or something like this, just pushing it forward and continuing talking about it, being open about it, more people will jump on board, especially if you're trying to push independence, be very animated and very happy about it. People will jump on board with that. You just got to build that momentum.
It's an exciting idea. It's one worth talking about, and we're going to continue doing that here. Your thoughts are welcome. Let's go to Lucas. He is in Raleigh listening to Talk Radio 850. Hey, Lucas.
Hey, well, certainly under the Constitution, states have the right. But there's a difference between what you have the right to do and what's practical. And ever since the Civil War, folks are pretty clear that if you're going to secede, you probably should be seceding for a reason that has a positive moral value.
What do you mean by that?
I would add to this, I mean that seceding in order to protect your right to have slaves, for example, was not a very good reason. And if the federal government's going to let you secede, they're going to do so because they think it's good for the country. The federal government makes decisions about what's good for the federal government, not what's good for everybody everywhere in the world.
Hear, hear.
Well, I would push for independence because not for slaves or anything, but I want to be free. I want to be free from the tyranny of the federal government.
And I think if you want to do that, you can try, but I doubt you'll find enough other people who would agree with you. And here's the number one reason. Let's say, and you pick the state. You tell me which state are you in that you want to secede?
Oh, New Hampshire for sure.
New Hampshire. if New Hampshire secedes, what do you think the odds are that the federal government will leave them with any of the weapons that were paid for by the federal government?
They can take them.
Yeah, who cares?
I don't want them.
Yeah, I
this
don't
is
want
your
any
reason.
of their
How
stuff.
are you going to defend yourself against a Chinese or a Russian invasion?
I don't think
I have private guns, and we don't have to defend ourselves from them. We're tucked away inside the United States.
But we're not. You're not in the United States if you secede.
So the United States government, say hypothetically that the New Hampshire
Not if you
seceded from
secede.
the Union, and all that was left was New Hampshire, then the rest of the United States. Somehow the Chinese sent a huge fleet of forces around to the other side of North
They wouldn't
America,
need a
and the
huge
United States
fleet.
would just stand by and like, oh well, go ahead.
Well,
They're
now
not
wait a
part
minute.
of us.
I don't want to, rely on the
There's
United
only
States
about
for
20
protection.
people in New Hampshire. Why do they need a huge fleet?
Lucas, what you're talking about is fear. And you're right. The number one reason that people would oppose secession is fear. And it's ridiculous fear-mongering ideas like the Chinese are going to invade New Hampshire. Why would the Chinese invade New Hampshire?
Weapons right now, then?
I'm sorry?
Couldn't we just give up all our nuclear weapons and all our military right now? Then, if no one's actually going to invade us.
It wouldn't bother me, actually. If you want to shut down the nuclear weapons program, then that's fine. Here in New Hampshire, I don't know if it's like this in North Carolina, but Lucas, here in New Hampshire, guns are everywhere. There are all kinds of people.
I always assume someone's concealed carrying in
The
the state.
Democrats.
There will be no
Small
lack of
guns.
guns.
Small guns, but you can't fight a tank with those weapons.
You don't
can't
know
fight,
who. Hold on there. You
aircraft
don't
with
know
those
who
weapons.
has what in New Hampshire, man. New Hampshire is
I know
one of
they
the
don't
most
have a tank.
gun freedom-oriented places
Sorry, they don't
out
have
there.
tanks. They don't allow anti-aircraft weapons as a legal ownership item. Only members of the military can own anti-aircraft weapons.
So can you tell me
you're talking
exactly,
about-
Lucas,
you're
what
talking
the
about giving up-
rationale
you're
would
telling
be?
me-
Lucas, would you tell me what the rationale would be for the Chinese to roll tanks into New Hampshire and take
I
over?
can't, but I can't answer your.
It's
I
fear.
can't
It's just
answer your
plain
question.
old fear-mongering,
Well,
then.
Can you, instead of stuffing words in my mouth, can you let me speak for myself?
You've been speaking this whole time.
'Cause
Go
I'm
ahead.
not fear-mongering. I've been speaking the whole time. You've spoken part of the time. Don't put words in my mouth.
Why do you
So my
oppose secession?
point is, what?
He's scared.
Why do you oppose secession?
My point is that if there were no federal government,
You're not getting an answer.
New Hampshire and every other state would be unprotected from any foreign incursion.
Do you think
The
that
idea, so if I can finish my thought so you can get what I'm talking about, I think you're right that if New Hampshire seceded, it would be safe. But the only reason it would be safe is because of whatever relationship it carried on with the United States. So let's imagine for a moment that New Hampshire was an actual foreign country. What would stop the United States
Look,
from invading?
every country is protected by its allies and the friends it makes. So your argument is
protected by
moot.
itself.
Every single country
It's
is that
itself.
way.
You're wrong. Really? We're protected by our allies?
Of course.
We are.
No,
Yes.
I disagree. I'm with you on this one,
Our
Lucas. At
shores.
least stand by. Actually, I'll bring you back here because I appreciate the challenge on this. I disagree with Lauren. More coming up. Lucas actually held on through the break from Raleigh, listening to Talk Radio 850. I want to bring him back on here. But first, there was some discussion amongst the co-hosts.
Yeah.
Lauren, aka Objectivist Girl, you were making some sort of statement about the allies, and you were
Yes.
using terms that made it sound like they were our allies. But I've never been in.
I'm not
I know.
discussing
I,
people.
the thing is that we've all been indoctrinated in this
Mhm.
country, and so it's hard to get to the point where you don't use "we" anymore when you're
Right.
discussing the federal government. And
It
so
takes
I'm
real
very
practice.
guilty of it. I mean, I've changed my rhetoric about several things, like bad references towards women, and I don't see them as negative anymore. So, like, I mean, that goes into the polyamory discussion. But I mean,
That's a whole other discussion.
yeah.
That's a whole
But
nother
what you were
show.
saying,
I've changed
what were you saying
a
earlier,
lot of
though,
my rhetoric.
about allies, the U.S.
So-
allies? You think they're going to protect the United States
Now-
if attacked?
Before the break, I was of the opinion that having allies helps the federal government and protects it from attacks. Now, I'm willing to concede after discussing this with you that I don't think that it helps the U.S., but
The U.S.
I
federal
do
government?
think that the U.S. being allies with the U.S. helps other countries. And I don't think people want to mess with,
When you say
with
other
other
countries,
countries.
their governments.
Right. When you
Might
say
not help
other
their
countries,
people.
right, you mean the governments,
Yes.
not the people.
Yeah, no, not the people.
Because I think it's important to separate those.
I mean, it kind of protects the people because if the country isn't being bombed, then people aren't being bombed.
Well,
so I
you're
guess
presuming you're presuming that it's the military that's protecting people, right? And that's a common presumption. People believe that about the military. But the truth is, if the military needs to roll a tank over top of your house in order to get to some sort of strategic target of importance to them, your house is not important to them. They're going to crush your house and anyone who's inside the house at that time. And they won't care.
I understand and agree with that that the state is violent and that they will stop at nothing. But
the military protects the state first and foremost. They're here to protect their installations and like the state governments and the federal government.
And that's its motive, of course. And its motive, of course, has nothing to do with citizens. They don't care about us. We're just a number. But I do need to say that it is the military, our strong military. I'm sorry, the federal government's. It's so hard. The federal government's strong military that protects other countries from being other countries' governments from being attacked. And
that's a jump in logic. I mean,
military.
You can argue that point, but I don't know if it's necessarily true.
Well,
the reason why Hitler didn't invade Switzerland wasn't because the U.S. government was going to come to their aid. It was
everyone there
because
was armed.
Everyone there is armed. And a similar statement was made, I don't know, was it one of the Japanese generals during World War II about why they didn't invade the U.S. mainland, because there was like a rifle behind every blade of grass, some sort of statement like that. That has nothing to do with the military protecting anyone.
No. I'm not saying that in every instance that our federal government is allies with another federal government is the reason that people don't attack them. I'm saying that it is taken into consideration by
Certainly
other
people
countries'
believe that.
governments.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt.
I do believe that.
I'll give you that. But it sounded
willing
earlier,
to be swayed by good evidence.
Lauren, it sounded earlier, though, like you were saying that if New Hampshire seceded from the United States, that it'd all be fine because we could rely on the United States government to protect New Hampshire.
I think eventually the New Hampshire government and the federal government would be allies.
I disagree. I think that if there's any fear, not necessarily, but if there's anything to fear, and I want to get Lucas back on the line here to get his thoughts on this.
It's the federal government.
Right. I'm not worried about the Chinese or the Russians or anything like that rolling in tanks. If there's anything to be concerned about, and I'm really not concerned about the U.S. either, but they're the biggest concern to me. They're the ones who are closest, and they're the ones who are most likely to be upset about New Hampshire leaving.
But isn't the reason that the Free State Project picked New Hampshire is because of the fact that it's less likely to be attacked in the case of secession?
No,
one of the reasons I'm going to look it up because I was told that one of the reasons New Hampshire was
Free State Project wasn't created for secession.
No, it's not a secessionist movement. I was one of the voters in the original vote for New Hampshire, and I did choose New Hampshire, and part of the reason why was because it's got international borders, which is nice. So, but that had wasn't even thinking about, will that make it vulnerable or not vulnerable to
the biggest selling
attack.
point was just a small population.
Let's go. Well, there are a lot of great points. No income tax, no sales tax. I mean, there's 101 reasons to choose New Hampshire. And in fact, the Free State Project website has that. And it's a great list. Go to freestateproject.org and look for in the menus the 101 reasons to move to New Hampshire. But Lucas, you were upset in the last segment because you felt like you weren't getting a chance to speak. And, I want to apologize if you felt like you were getting talked over. Sometimes when a caller says something, the hosts want to respond rather than let the caller get through an entire spiel. It's just it's part of conversation. So just to prove that I'm more than happy to let you continue, please go ahead.
Well, I guess there's a host of benefits that one gets from being allied with the federal government in the United States. We're friends with most of the countries in the world. New Hampshire,
well, I'm not,
is not. And I'm not making an argument how good or bad New Hampshire is. It's just to say New Hampshire doesn't have the resources to make contact with 180 other countries.
Who needs to?
Why would New Hampshire need to do that?
Well, maybe it doesn't, but then it suffers in world trade.
No,
for
no, it
example.
wouldn't. No, the reason it wouldn't
the
suffer.
internet exists for a reason.
How does it get in the WTO? How does it get?
Who the hell needs
Why
that?
would you want to get into that for the first place?
Exactly. So you don't need to, but you lose any benefit.
There's no benefit.
You get from being a part.
There's no
Well, you can
benefit.
make it-
Lucas,
Okay,
look,
you can yell
look at
me,
it from
but
this
there-
perspective.
You can yell at me, but there is a
I don't think
benefit to
anyone's
being
yelling.
a part of the global economy. We run the global economy.
You just keep talking, so I can't even have a conversation with you, Lucas. I want to address your point about the supposed benefits.
Address whatever you want. It's tiresome.
All right,
I
goodbye.
should've-
I'm tired of it. So I would have liked to have had a conversation with Lucas, but he just wants to continue talking and not allow questions to happen. I wanted to ask about what the supposed benefit is. I have no interest in the World Trade Organization. Those are a set of rules that governments follow to force, strictures on business. Look, if New Hampshire seceded, what I would like to see, and I'm not in charge, but hopefully it would be like this, I would like to see free trade.
Yeah, voluntary exchange between free individuals. That's what I would love to see, just not in this area of New Hampshire, but around the world via the internet or anything else.
Let anyone come and sell a product. Let anyone buy a product from wherever they want. And you don't need a government to facilitate those things. If you just have an open port, and New Hampshire does have an international port, if you've got an open port, ships should be able to come in there and bring in whatever they want, and they shouldn't have to pay any taxes. They shouldn't have to pay any tariffs or whatever. They shouldn't pay import, export taxes. If New Hampshire had no import and export taxes, it'd probably be as busy as Hong Kong as far as business is concerned.
It'd be a port for the entire North America, everyone bringing product through New Hampshire.
Business happens naturally. You don't need to have some federal bureaucrat facilitating business.
And if you're a business person and you're running a business that does international trade, they're going to go to where they can make the most profit, and that's going to be New Hampshire if they have independence.
Hopefully when we have independence. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. That's 855-450-3733. But I think the caller there, his point about fear-mongering, I think he said he wasn't fear-mongering, but he absolutely was. I think we should come back and talk about that, and your calls and thoughts are welcome at 855-450-FREE. It's Free Talk Live. We've been talking about secession, and certainly that is on a lot of people's minds, with Scotland currently counting the votes of a big vote today over there to possibly leave the United Kingdom. Of course, spawning discussion about secession everywhere, including the United States. And your thoughts are welcome at 855-450-FREE. Now, drewsdefense.org is a website that's been set up to help out Andrew Michael Jones. He's a Free State Project participant, and I believe all three of us in the studio here tonight are also Free State Project participants. We've made the move to New Hampshire, but most of the Free State Project participants have not yet moved. There's the goal, the idea of the Free State Project is to move 20,000 liberty-oriented people, have them all come together to the same place. And New Hampshire was chosen. We mentioned the 101 reasons to move to New Hampshire on the Free State Project website. You should check that out at freestateproject.org. And then if you love liberty, get signed up and start making plans to move here. Don't wait until 20,000. Just start making your plans to get here as soon as possible.
Best decision I've ever made in my life. Get here as soon as you can.
Seriously, this is the happiest place on earth.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's definitely one of the best decisions I've ever made. It's interesting talking about secession when the audience you're talking to, if they are of a liberty-oriented mindset and they object to secession, usually the reason is because they're afraid of the federal government rolling in tanks.
Which is a completely normal response.
Of course.
that this has happened in this country before. There was a secession, and almost 1 million people were murdered. So yes, that violence that has already happened here before.
So it's not unreasonable to expect that response from people, that fear is the basis of their response. For people who aren't so liberty-oriented, a lot of their responses are, well, the Russians or the Chinese are going to be the ones bringing troops into New Hampshire. So it's always fear. That's always the reason not to secede.
Yes, everybody wants to go on emotional judgment.
I have no fear of some foreign power coming over to this landmass. But in regards to the United States government, the federal government, I can't. It is a fear of mine that they would be violent, but at the same time, it's 2014. Everyone has cameras,
right?
All right. All they would need is a couple of YouTube videos go viral of federal agents, using drones or whatnot, killing innocent people, bombing houses. That will get out around the world.
It's true.
I'm not afraid of something like I'm afraid that happening, but it would die relatively quickly if something like this really did happen because the amount of media that would come around it.
The huge difference between now and the 1800s, right? Back then, news traveled by horseback.
Yeah.
The thing is that even if that is a legitimate fear, and that's an if that's a legitimate fear, it's still not what we need to base our decisions on. And I'm gonna go objectivist here for a moment. But if John Adams looked past fear. I mean, he wasn't a great president, but he was definitely the coolest founding father.
Mm-hmm.
He took on independence as his thing, and he was considered obnoxious and disliked for his push for independence. And while everyone else was afraid, he stood up for it, and he was afraid. He made that very clear in
you want to talk about
all
fear?
Of his accounts.
They really did have British soldiers around hurting people.
Their houses.
We are free because he looked past fear.
Well, I'm not free.
And he thought rationally about all of the implications of what that can mean, and freedom was more valuable to him than the fear that he felt.
And that fear was totally justified. There were people
course.
being, harmed very viciously at that time.
I argue that the fear of New Hampshire getting attacked by the federal government if we secede is not legitimate.
It's not as realistic. It's based on pure speculation.
Yes.
We'll go to continue with the discussion here because I think the fear issue is what people really need to get over to embrace this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk to Frank first, though. He's in Raleigh as well. Frank, you're on Free Talk Live, listening to Talk Radio 850. Go ahead. Frank in Raleigh?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Can you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yep, go for it.
Okay,
go
great.
for it.
Hey, first of all, just a brief note about another reason the Swiss don't get attacked is during World War II they held everybody's gold and everybody's diamonds and wallets while they went out and kicked the living daylights out of one another, and they were buying Messerschmitts from the Germans and et cetera, et cetera. But I want to talk to that previous caller. My cousins and I managed my grandparents' farm out in Cloud County, Kansas. And a farmer has to buy everything wholesale and sell everything at retail. And I am telling you right this minute, if we could sell our corn and our millet and our soybeans on the open market without all these nefarious middlemen of the World Trade Organization, I guarantee you the coffers would be rich. And that goes for every one of the sovereign states of these United States. There wouldn't be any trouble whatsoever. And as far as I can assure you, I know here in North Carolina, we've got our own port, and we could do very much the same thing if there was an invasion from any professional army. When the dust settled, the only thing you'd find on the ground were shotgun shells, maybe a few beer cans, and a whole bunch of dead bad guys who would not make it past Wrightsville Beach.
So it sounds to me like, Frank, you're on board with the secession idea.
Yeah, and when you were talking about moving to New Hampshire, I mean, the weather down here in North Carolina is so comfortable. We get about 3 inches of snow, the whole state shuts down. Everybody runs to the grocery store to get bread and milk, and then we sit home and run around in the snow all week. So I don't know if we get anything done if we moved up there to New Hampshire.
I really quickly got over that. I spent my whole life wanting to move to somewhere warm, and because I really, like, my allergies just don't do well with cold.
See, here's the thing. There's modern day technology. There's, houses are heated, cars have heats, there's plows.
I got over it so quickly.
Because
it's so warm here. The hearts here.
The community is where the warmth comes from here in New Hampshire. Frank, thanks for the call, man. I appreciate it. I do appreciate your call. Secession is the hot topic tonight, spawned by the discussions regarding Scotland looking to possibly leave the United Kingdom. The polling results are not in yet. There is an exit poll that unfortunately is showing 54% voting to not leave the United Kingdom. But again, it's just an exit poll. Who knows how many different polling locations they were polling at, how many people they talked to. When you're doing exit polling, you only get to talk to the people who are willing to talk to you. I've done exit polls before, and you try to pitch everybody walking by, hey, do you have time for a quick question? And most people don't have time for a quick question. They're going to work or going to the school or wherever it is they're going. And
those things are not very accurate. I wouldn't rely on that.
I would say it's anyone's game at this point over in Scotland. You're welcome to share your thoughts toll free, 855-450-FREE in Pennsylvania. Ed, you're on Free Talk Live.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
We've got you.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up an idea I haven't heard anybody talk about. It would be a new voter registration list for constitutionally limited government. The idea would be that our government now is illegal and unconstitutional, and it would need to be replaced by a legal one. And you would just start a registration list of people who would like to vote, and then they would vote kind of like a parallel set of representatives who would be legal but maybe out of power, and that would kind of address some of the situations there that people like Luke and other people are concerned about with the military, because individuals in the military do have an oath to the Constitution, and I realize that would, maybe there wouldn't satisfy everybody's needs, but it would allow our government to be much more limited, and that could be run also in parallel with Secession, and if we could move a more limited government in there.
Well, for me, it's not, when you say ours, that's your government, that's not my government. But my question to you is, do you really think the federal government is repairable?
No, I don't think it is repairable. I just think...
then why push this idea?
We just started a brand new one.
So let me see if I'm clear on what you're saying here. You're saying hold an election, hold your own elections, elect representatives so they won't be in the federal government, but you want to create a competing federal government.
Well, it would be a competing government, but it would be the constitutional limited government. If enough people now think our government's illegal and unconstitutional...
Would you be using the existing Constitution?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
But don't you think Lysander Spooner was correct when he said in the late 1800s that the Constitution has either authorized the tyranny that we face, and I'm paraphrasing, or it has been powerless to prevent it? Don't you think that's true?
Well, I think a lot depends on how we act.
Who's
the paper itself is just a paper, but it depends on how we act and the way we move.
So what makes you think that electing new people to some sort of alternative government that in the hopes of them getting control, I guess, would result in honest people doing the right thing? I mean, doesn't power attract the corrupt?
Yeah, I think it will, but it'll start as it's kind of like a step backwards, really.
I don't think you can hit reset on restoring the
republic. Where our government was more limited than it is now. It would be a compromise, yes. But
ultimately, it would just start getting bigger again, wouldn't it? Even if you could get what you wanted, right? And that would be unrealistic, because the existing federal government is humongous, and the idea that your own representatives would somehow be able to sort of take it over, I don't know how that transition would exactly work. But even if you could shrink the federal government down to 1,795 size or whatever, wouldn't it just start building itself up again? Wouldn't it just aggregate more power? Wouldn't they just create more programs?
If you give men in a far-off land the right to steal from you at the point of a gun, it's just going to do the same thing all over again.
Yeah, it might do the same thing all over again, but it'll also give an opportunity or a window for succession if you think that...
but, brother, you're not going to have... I mean, it seems like a real pie in the sky. It's hard enough to promote the idea of secession, right? You're saying, let's take over the federal government with whoever these people are that wouldn't be as fear-mongering or power-mongering as the existing people in the Fed. You're saying take over the federal government through some sort of process, which has not really been defined here, but to take over the federal government to allow people to secede. Wouldn't it just be easier to promote the idea of secession today and have a state vote to secede and see what happens?
Yeah, you could do both.
Well, good luck to you, Ed. I think it's a proposal. I don't know how much support
I'd rather
you're going to get
for each state to secede from
you don't have my support on this one, because I don't care about the federal government. I see no value in saving or rescuing or rebuilding it at all.
In his defense, I would say this: I wouldn't mind seeing not that I would even partake in a federal election because I don't support the federal government, but I would love to see someone run for, like, actually have name recognition in a federal election, like how Ron Paul ran on an educational platform.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see someone with some stature run on an educational platform in debates about secession.
Ooh, now that would be interesting.
Now, I would support something like that, but that's as far as I would go.
Ed,
You know,
go
I
ahead.
think that it would be a good idea for us to maintain a decent relationship with the federal government.
Who's us?
If I'm sorry, the New
Because I want no
Hampshire,
relationship with them.
the New Hampshire government, and hear me out on this.
Okay.
I think that
I'd love to hear
having
that,
them as allies when they're surrounding, I mean, all of our borders will be the U.S. And that's,
At least until Vermont secedes.
and I've
Maine.
got good evidence here that I don't think that the federal government is going to attack us violently, but and eventually I want to get into that. But the point is that maintaining a good relationship with the federal government, in the case of secession, would be beneficial. First of all, to have them as allies, and to have that.
Why would you
that
want to be
relationship
allied with a bunch of thugs? I don't understand the
these
motivation.
people murder
I mean,
people around
I'm
the
not
world.
talking about a close relationship. I'm talking about keeping it peaceful. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure,
when you
let's
don't,
be
Yeah.
peaceful.
when you
Let's not
don't-
attack
Let's not
them.
shoot each
when
other.
you
That's fine
don't
with me.
like a person in the room, you can either go out of your way to be a dick, or you can ignore them,
Wait.
or whatever, or you could just have a basic conversation with them, act like everything is normal, and then just, and it keeps things peaceful. You don't have to like them.
Obviously, if
I
New
mean-
Hampshire was the only state to secede, they would be our neighbors, all right, the federal
Right.
government, all right? And I have no problem with free trade with anyone on this planet,
Sure.
Right.
all right? But when you say ally, you would support them in an attack or something along those lines.
I use
and,
ally
I guess-
loosely.
Okay.
Yeah,
because
I'm
okay,
talking about,
with like some sort of free
war
trade
allies.
and free communications and all that jazz. I'm
Yes.
good with that, but I don't want to see any kind of where New Hampshire has to like go to war with the United States.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about a military alliance kind of idea. So the
Just lost Ed. Thanks, Ed, for the call.
loose allies, not like I want to be your best friend, just like, tolerant,
any
open
alliance.
lines of
Nothing to do with
communication.
it.
I don't want a military alliance suggests that you would be obligated to come to their defense. I'm not interested in that.
No, I don't think we should have that close of a relationship.
I don't think
with
there should be any relationship beyond we're not going to build a border fence on our side and we'll hope that they don't build one on theirs.
them. Right, I don't want to be enemies, is what I'm saying.
Sure, I don't either, but I'm also at the same time I'm not interested in entering into any kind of an agreement because they're going to want things from you whenever you want to get into an agreement with them. This is Free Talk Live. Hey, are you ready to secede from the United States?
Yes.
Because a lot of people are scared. And
Screwed.
we can talk about the fear aspect of this because this is really all that the anti-secession crowd has in their corner is fear, fear, fear. Because everything else is really, it looks great. Everything else about secession sounds wonderful. Like more independence for people, the ability to not have to pay the federal income tax for folks anymore.
The New Hampshire Independence Foundation actually has 10 reasons to declare independence. So if you guys want to check that out, their economic freedom, greater privacy, no bailout of corporate welfare, better schools, medical freedom, keep money in New Hampshire, children no longer born into debt, more secure,
That's a
no
big
more
one.
inflation, and greater representation.
And how about no military warmongering around the world?
That's just the top
No blood
10.
on your hands. That's a nice, refreshing thing. So there's all kinds of reasons to leave the United States. Seems like the number one objection is, as far as to stay in the United States, is the fear that either
Scared.
the foreigners are going to invade or that the feds are going to invade. And I think we need to dig further into that, but also we need to get to your calls and thoughts. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. The we tonight, by the way, includes me, Ian.
Rob.
And Lauren, Objectivist Girl.
Let's go to the phones. We've got Jake. He's in St. George, Utah, listening to KZNU. Hello, Jake.
Hi. So I wanted to speak to those who have been misled into believing that we need the federal government. It's simple. There's nothing wrong with cooperation among states. There's nothing that says that if these states get together and they want to defend our nation, then great. They get together, they cooperate, and they do it. We don't need the federal government overseeing us to tell us how to do that.
I like you, sir.
And if these states choose to get together to go at war with someone, then other states can opt out. They can say, you know what, we're not interested in going.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why we couldn't just do that. Some states could say, you know what, we want to go at war. We want to do this. And if those people in that state want to do that, what's the issue?
Because they're scared of thinking outside the box.
Well, there's a belief that somehow the military is this efficient bureaucracy. There's a certain set of people in the United States who believe that the military is somehow separate from all of the other rules that apply to bureaucracy. Like, we know that bureaucracy is slow, inefficient, stupid in a lot of ways. They're poor at managing money. They're just a terrible way to organize. But yet somehow when, you give the bureaucrats guns and tanks, all of a sudden they become efficient, and all of a sudden they become, this amazing force that can't be reckoned with. But
well, the military is efficient at killing people.
Are they that efficient?
No, they're not.
I bet you a group of mercenaries would be more efficient.
Look
at
how
killing
long
people.
it took them to find Osama bin Laden.
Well, that was the point I was going to make, right? So look at Afghanistan,
They
Iraq.
suck at this.
You've got in Afghanistan the big, strong U.S. military for years was held at bay by a bunch of ragtag group of insurgents running around from cave to cave. I mean, if you're going up against people who are defending their home turf, the defense, even if they don't have the budget, is going to have they're going to have an advantage.
Did you see that video where the federal government's military, the U.S. government's military is running from children throwing rocks at them?
Oh, wow.
It's really funny. I mean, it's really
one.
it's totally comical because these big, strong military men are there with their guns and everything, and there are these children just throwing rocks, and the military men are running.
At least they ran away rather than shoot the kids.
Yeah.
So
that's the only reason it's funny.
Yeah. Hey, Jake, so it sounds like you're on board with this whole secession thing. Have you talked to people about it there in Utah? What's the response you get?
Well, there hasn't been much discussion here about it, and unfortunately, Ideally, I know it's unrealistic. Ideally, I would like to see the federal government reeled back to what it really was, a powerless branch. Realistically, is that going to happen? No.
Coming from someone
going to happen. And
coming from someone who used to be a restored republic person pretty hard for a few years, there's just looking at how big this federal government is and who would take power if they try to put it back to restoring the republic and restoring the Constitution. The easier solution is just simply push for all states to secede and allow each state to govern itself. Yeah,
starting at the very beginning will lead us to where we are now. I mean, and faster because, we have more technology now. So the government will just grow back to where it is. It's a bad idea. We need to get rid of the Constitution. The Constitution is oppressive, to say the least.
Well, it's the people that are oppressive. The document, as was pointed out by our earlier caller, it just sits there in a box. It doesn't. It doesn't do anything.
But the rhetoric is oppressive.
So, Jake, the thing that I would suggest would be get the conversation started. If people aren't talking about it in Utah, use the news tomorrow as an excuse to start a conversation with family or friends or whatever, and start to put the feelers out. And let's talk about secession because we can talk this into reality, right? If people believe that it's possible, then it is possible. If people don't believe it's possible, then it's just not possible. So the conversation gets those beliefs changing. It gets people assessing what their beliefs are in the first place. Most people have never thought about this. And so give them the opportunity to think about it for the first time and then come up with their objections and maybe answer those objections as best you can and then give them the opportunity later to think about it again. Jake, thanks for the call tonight, man. I appreciate hearing from you.
Most people aren't even aware that New Hampshire is given the right in its constitution to a revolution. Most people aren't even aware of that.
Most people in New Hampshire probably aren't aware of that.
Yeah, exactly. That's and it may be unique in that I wasn't able to find any information.
That it is unique, but I could be wrong about that.
It was the first country to rebel against the British, or the first state to rebel against the British.
I believe you're correct on that.
Yeah.
Toll-free number tonight, 855-450-FREE. So if you're scared Okay, I get it. I get the fear, man. The federal government is a scary group of people. And the fear about the feds being the ones rolling in tanks, it's legit, right? People are afraid for a reason. There are people who've been put in prison in this country.
Just look at the force they used in Boston with the
the Boston bombers, where they were going literally door to door.
They literally shut down the entire city with that.
Yeah, and look how they're handling things in Ferguson. I mean, that's the thing, is we feel the fear. We are human. We feel the fear, but that's the thing, is that we've decided to rise above that primal instinct of emotion, an emotional-driven action, an emotional-driven thought, and instead think about the implications and the cost-benefit analysis of us becoming a free state. And so, I mean, if you can rise above that fear, seriously look at the cost-benefit analysis. It weighs so much on the side of secession.
Oh, yeah.
It's ridiculous. And look at
just the money that you would keep in the state, as our caller from North Carolina earlier was pointing out. You leave the United States federal government instantly. People are no longer needing to send Social Security, income tax, whatever, corporate taxes, all this money that's just funneling into the federal government.
Not to mention all the federal regulations on businesses as well.
Right. And the trade restrictions, as we were talking about earlier.
And we get these assertions. I mean, we're coming up with this information from the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence. So if you want to know more about that, go to nhindependence.org.
Yes,
and
great
if
group.
you go to the About and go under Reasons, it's got the top 10 reasons. And all over the site, it's got amazing, incredible reasons. And you could just see that. I mean, and then think about all the reasons you don't want to secede and see if you can come up with 10. You can't. You just...
There's no reason to stay in the United States. Beyond
Fear.
Yeah.
That's it. If you can come up with another one, please call in and tell me.
Right. I mean,
because I can't think of one.
Yeah, because it's always some scary group is going to hurt us if we leave the United States.
They're hurting us now.
Well, the United States federal government certainly is hurting us now.
Right.
And the other scary groups are supposedly the Chinese and the Russians. But the Chinese are going to invade thing doesn't make any sense, because why would the Chinese want to kill their best customer?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, the United States, people in the various different states are the ones who are buying Chinese products. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you know, I'm of the opinion, and I lack the evidence for this opinion, but I do want to say that I think that the reason that people think China would hurt us in the instance that we secede is because they think that China is hostile to the federal government. Now, if we secede, we are independent from that. And I think that it's the federal government that's pissing off China,
right? Which
is the reason that they're hostile. So why would they associate that with us? We should get free of that.
That's a great point, because if whether it's New Hampshire, Vermont, or whoever, if they secede, if a state secedes, they are no longer going to be warmongering around the world. They're no longer going to have the blood on their hands, and hopefully, presumably, wouldn't be the target of terrorism after that point either. Not just the scary specter of the Red Horde coming over here and invading. And it really just goes back to this fear about the Red Chinese that a lot of people in this country have that's completely baseless at this point. I mean, in China, they're having trouble keeping their own state together, let alone, invading this one. It's Free Talk Live. You can bring up anything you want. Lots of talk about secession here this evening, and would hope that there's more talk going on off of our airwaves. People talking at the dinner table or at the so-called water cooler or wherever it is that people talk should be talking about secession, because, as I was pointing out before, we can make this real by talking about it. We can convince people, overcome these objections, these fear-mongering objections, by talking about this issue. And the more the issue becomes discussed, the more popular it will become, in the same way that it's happened over in the UK, in Scotland, where the votes are still being counted. It's about 2 a.m. over there. And I don't think there's any official word as of yet, but if you've heard differently, feel free to reach out to us here at 855-450-FREE. The Guardian actually has a page that is kind of giving detailed results on what is happening out there. There's results for Orkney, wherever the hell that is, Orkney in Scotland, 67% voting to stay in the UK, with 32.8% voting to leave. Their turnout, the voter turnout there, 83%. But the analysis says it's not a surprise. Orkney is one of the most pro-union authorities in Scotland. In the Paddy Power list of authorities, the most likely to vote yes, it was 6th from the bottom. So, so apparently that was expected. We've got Daryl. He's in Austin, Texas. You're on Free Talk Live. Hey, Daryl.
Hey, yes, I've actually been watching the results on BBC World News, and also I think that if Scotland wins its independence, it would actually bolster the pro secessionist movement and give them more ammunition on a peaceful, leaving of the country.
You mean in the U.S.?
They could show that in the U.S. So that means, like, when New Hampshire left, they could say, hey, look how Scotland did it peacefully. Look how Czechoslovakia split peacefully. Why can't we leave peacefully?
Right, that was the point we were making earlier, is if this works out, we are going to see a huge spike in polls that are about people supporting secession.
If there was any violence, it really would be from the federal agents, the federal government. They're the ones that would probably shoot first, not any state that tried to leave them.
Definitely, I agree with that. And also that there's also a thing where Belgium may be splitting into 2 or 3 different countries because of some of their issues. And also, I don't see America being the same way 100 years ago, not even 20 or 50 years from now, because as the federal government becomes more and more obtrusive and just totalitarian, people are going to want to leave. I mean, look at the number of people who are leaving California and coming to Texas to work because their companies are leaving, because the companies are leaving the totalitarianism of that state.
Same thing with New York.
Oh, yeah.
I think if New Hampshire seceded, you would see a large amount of people move here for more freedom, just besides people that move for the Free State Project. And you'd also see a lot of boom in this economy here with all those people coming with money because they want to build a freer society, but also because they want to work for, make more money and be free.
So don't wait for the rush. Move now. Get in on the ground floor.
Right.
There you go.
You want to be one of the first to come here. You actually brought up countries that were considering secession, and I actually had the list here. There's, of course, Scotland, Venice, Catalonia, Quebec, Transylvania.
That's a new one. Transylvania?
Nope. No. I would know that one. TRANSNISTRIA. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Daryl, any other thoughts? Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing. Orkney is the Orkney Islands, which are right north of the islands that are, I believe, right north of Scotland. If you want to know where that's at.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the heads up. Anything else you want to add in?
That's it.
Thanks, Daryl. Appreciate the call tonight. Let's continue here with Tom in Nashua, New Hampshire. You're on Free Talk Live, Tom.
Yeah, by the way, it was a number of years ago. It was actually Ian, Mark, and Julia. I called in. I remember because my question, it was a word trap. How many years have we been fighting a war in Iraq?
I am not fighting in Iraq.
You lost me at we.
We.
Somebody said, that's right. That was the word trap that I posed, and somebody said 4 years, and that's when I introduced you people to that one, which I said, I have not been fighting any war in Iraq, and neither have any of you guys. See, now, Julia...
So you deserve credit for that one, huh, Tom? Thank you for that. I mean, that's a good one, because it's something that I think really stuck over time, and Free Talk Live has, at least my side of the studio, when our normal co-host is here, I'm always on Mark when he messes that one up. Always jumping on him.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're on top of that, Ian. I want to learn to stop.
It's a pet peeve of mine. It's really frustrating to me.
Well, I'm glad. Then we should hang out more often.
Go ahead, Tom.
You see, I remember it because I was saying neither have any of you guys, and of course I was using the word guys in a more general sense. But there was other ones like which amendment to the United States Constitution gives you the right to freedom of assembly? And what percentage of the victims of drug asset forfeiture over the years have been innocent victims? Of course, they're all innocent. Just because they're selling cocaine doesn't make them any less innocent. But what I'm disappointed at seeing this election cycle is if the Free State Project is so big, I guess they're not signing up much with the Libertarian Party, because if the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire was successful in getting these Free Staters in there, they'd have more libertarians on the ballot. You got a pitiful number of...
The Libertarian Party in New Hampshire is a pitiful Libertarian Party, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Tom. Thanks for the call tonight. Now,
there's a lot of Free Staters that won through the primaries, but none of them ran as libertarians,
right? So these are probably the people who the Free State Project participants. Listeners just tuning in, the Free State Project is an idea of moving liberty-oriented people all to the same place. The three of us in the studio are all Free State Project participants. We've all been early movers to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project. Anyway, people are running for political office, and they're winning. There are something like 11 or 12 Free Staters in the state legislature already. Maybe at the end of the elections this year, we'll have more than a dozen if all goes, well, you can't plan these things, but if all goes as hoped.
Yeah.
But yeah, none of them are running as actual Libertarian Party members. And the reason for that primarily is because it's just easier to run as a Republican or Democrat. It's incredibly difficult, not just in New Hampshire, but in all kinds of states across the United States, to get ballot access as a third party, whether it's the Libertarians, Greens. We've got the New Hampshire Liberty Party here as well. It's very not impossible, but it's very difficult because you have to collect thousands of petition signatures. Whereas, why would you want to do that when you can just go pay a small fee and register as a Republican or Democrat? It just doesn't make sense to run as a libertarian. There's more coming up here in moments. This is Free Talk Live. You take control. We've got more to say about secession here. In fact, we started a Slate article that was inspired by the Scottish secession movement, sort of focusing on New Hampshire, or not New Hampshire, but there's actually some folks from Vermont's secessionist movement, which arguably is a little stronger than the New Hampshire one. The Vermont one's been going on for longer.
For now.
Yeah, and they actually run political candidates there in Vermont who have a secessionist platform. So we're starting to emulate that here in New Hampshire as well. When I ran for governor this year, secession was my number 2 issue after marijuana decriminalization.
And you didn't call it independence; you actually called it secession.
Yeah, I kind of use them interchangeably, but you're right. It's safer to say independence.
It really is. People are much more receptive to it. I would say, and that's why I don't use selfish. I use rational self-interest.
I want to continue the story here from Slate, but Lauren, you actually had an answer to the objection, this sort of age-old fear about seceding. Oh, what if the feds roll in tanks, or what if somebody else attacks? Is there an answer from the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence?
So I've been referencing this page all night. It's nhindependence.org, and this is under the facts section. And the question is, couldn't this turn violent? Won't the United States military bomb us and invade us if we peacefully declare our independence? And this is their response, and I find this to be a very convincing argument. The Foundation is absolutely committed to a peaceful separation from the United States. We firmly believe that there is no room for a civilized, modern Western nation to resort to violence simply because some of its people choose to peacefully go their separate ways. It is true that convincing the government in Washington of this may take some work. Fortunately, history is on our side. In 1991, the Soviet Union, a brutal communist dictatorship that ruthlessly murdered millions of its own citizens, watched 14 of its member states repudiate the Soviet ideology and declare their independence. There was no bloodshed and no attempt to reconquer the newly free nations. Furthermore, the same pattern is played out across the globe for the past 100 years. In the 1900s, there were between 50 and 60 sovereign nations in the world. Today, there are nearly 200. The great centralizing trend of the 19th century has been completely reversed. Today, the future belongs to smaller nations and local control. The Foundation believes that the time is ripe for this decentralizing trend to take root in the United States. Now, more than ever, American citizens in New Hampshire and elsewhere distrust the federal government and understand that bureaucrats in Washington are ill-equipped to micromanage the lives of free people. And,
absolutely. There was another Rasmussen poll I was looking at where 60+ % of Americans think that the federal government does not have the consent of the governed. A lot of people are upset.
And by the way, they cited that in the 1900s, there were between 50 and 60 sovereign nations in the world. They did cite their source. It is from the Guinness Book of Answers in 1976. So I just want to make that clear that it is credible information.
I didn't know there was another Guinness Book. I always thought it was the Guinness Book of World Records. I guess there's a second Guinness Book.
There's a Book of Answers.
Huh.
You didn't know about the Book of Answers?
No.
Oh, interesting.
Learn something new every night here on
I
Freedom.
know. I love this show.
So what they're arguing is that the recent history of secession has been peaceful. That it hasn't really been.
It really has. I mean, if the Soviet Union, one of the most brutal countries ever, could let go of 14 member states, I mean, you'd think little old New Hampshire could pull it off.
Especially in today's age. In today's age, there's no way you're going to see, violence of Americans killing Americans. Like I don't see that happening in 2014.
It would be
anytime.
insane. I mean, that if anything would destroy the federal government's legitimacy more, it would be attacking people within the United States, because Americans can easily not care about people in other countries, and I think it's sad that they don't.
Well, that was a perfect example, like the whole that Bundy Ranch situation. Like there was a standoff between federal agents and a bunch of Americans with guns. Defending that ranch. No one was shot. There was a stand down. They went their separate ways.
And the feds backed off.
And all eyes, if we secede, all eyes will be on us.
When we secede.
When we secede.
Make it real.
And we, is in New Hampshire, secedes. All eyes will be on us. Everyone will know that if the federal government comes over here and attacks us, everyone in the country is going to be up in arms about it. They are. Because,
at least a lot of people are
because they'll
upset.
still consider us. I mean, we'll still have family in other parts of the country, and there will be people coming on board to defend us. I mean, it will not be a quiet thing. This will not be something that people don't notice. They're not going to attack us, and people aren't going to know about it.
Hopefully, it inspires other states around the union to also secede.
That's
it
without
could be a domino effect.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You'll see whole regions leave.
I guarantee you, if New Hampshire does, when New Hampshire does it, Texas will follow. I'm betting on Texas.
Just within the last 6 years, the discussion in the media about secession has been present. It's been talked about. After 2012 elections, there was a lot of buzz about secession, and maybe we'll see more of that in the future, hopefully with Scotland seceding. We're keeping our fingers crossed, but I don't want to get my hopes up too high. It's still anybody's game out there. We're going to continue to give you more on this. In fact, I want to continue the Slate article, which is sort of bouncing off of the Scottish secession and talking about what are the secession movements here in the United States. They're interviewing Kirkpatrick Sale from the Middlebury Institute in Vermont, which is one of the big pushers of the idea of secession. The Middlebury Institute for the Study of Separatism, Secession, and Self-Determination. Their website, middleburyinstitute.org. Not the prettiest site, but they're doing good work. In the last hour or something like that, I started this article from Slate, and it's about secession within the United States, which I think is a wonderful idea. States should leave, and individuals should secede too, in my opinion, but, I like the idea of states seceding too. The more decentralization we can have in the world, the better off everybody's going to be, the more choices that people will have of places to live. So we'll get back into that story. It's they're interviewing Kirkpatrick Sale from the Middlebury Institute. He's one of the big names in Vermont for the Vermont secessionist movement, which is a relatively strong thing from what I understand. I think their governor, their candidate for, I think it's lieutenant governor there, I think he pulled over 5% of the popular vote and I don't remember which year it was, but it was within the last decade, I do believe. So we'll give you more information about that. But first, let's go to Will. He's listening in Tallahassee to WVFT. Hey, Will.
It's Will Dance. I have the actual morning show on 93.3 VFT, and I love having you guys on in our evening lineup.
Oh, great!
I call you my show prep. I listen to you guys when I'm out and about, and no, we love having you guys at Free Talk Live. But talking about secession, I have often said, if you read the 1872 secession letter of South Carolina, if we're not there, well, then I'll kiss your white rear end. The United States has become so centralized and away from where I believe, or even our founding fathers envisioned it, or even what free men should actually even be like. But my point is, how do we secede without, and I believe one of your co-hosts mentioned it tonight, My biggest fear is not that the second shot will be heard around the world. My biggest fear is who will pull the trigger. The federal government will try and entice the populace, as they did at the Bundy Ranch and several other locations, to fire the first shot. Then they have all the reason they can and all the reason they need to invoke martial law, slaughter. It's what every government's always said. Well, it's an uprising, and we're quelling it. How do you prevent infiltrators into the free talk movement or the free state movement to where, I see these guys out at this Clive and Bundy incident where they're strapped to their guilds and don't believe. Look, I'm a carry guy.
Yep.
But guys, when you are wearing it out in open display and not having it at the ready, I'm one of those at the ready kind of guys. Then you allow those who are not part of what you believe to infiltrate your movement. And all of a sudden, one of them fires the first shot.
Yeah.
The federal government goes, see, it came from right on that ridge. And now we have every excuse to kill every one of these people because they're all armed terrorists.
Yeah, there's an argument. There's an argument, and there's a theory out there that the firing on the fort that started the Civil War was a false flag, that it was an agent provocateur, that it wasn't actually the South firing on the fort, that it was somebody from the federal government doing that to create the excuse. And so it's a totally legitimate concern that you have, and I don't have an answer for it.
At the end of the day, it's the federal government literally aggressing against peaceful people just because they're standing there defending themselves. Even if they fired first in a hypothetical situation, which I wouldn't want to see that even happen, the fact of the matter is there's a huge group of armed men on the other side of the ridge called the federal government, threatening to kill everyone there.
You just have to.
Right, and that's the delicate balance, guys, that worries me the most. I'm all for it. Look, I'm all for decentralization. My biggest fear is that the bloodbath that will have to occur.
It doesn't have to.
Well, it doesn't have to, but the federal government's going to make sure that it does.
As I said before,
they're going to demonize those.
As I said before, there's reason to believe through history that that they're not going to attack New Hampshire, but also I don't think that it would be in their best interest. I think, honestly, and this may seem far-fetched, I think that there would be a few countries that would come to our aid.
Well,
honestly.
I don't
see
think
that.
so.
But at the end of the day, though, like for me,
not Scotland.
I believe in freedom and independence for New Hampshire. The federal government may come down, they may not. Who knows? But at the end of the day, I'm going to stand up for what I believe.
Well, yeah,
in.
we can't hold back. We can't hold back based on the fear.
And I agree, guys. Like I said, I agree 100%. I just share my fears with you.
But put it out.
It's a legitimate fear. I'm not saying it's not.
Look at it from this perspective, Will. So, as was pointed out earlier, I know you guys are getting the first hour, I think, there in Tallahassee right now. But so we've been talking about secession all night, and you're calling live in our third hour of the show. So we've covered a few of these things that we'll be hitting if you're in Tallahassee in a little while. But was pointed out, Lauren's pointed out that in the past, or the recent past, the last 100 years, secessions have been relatively peaceful, in comparison. And if you go back to the Civil War, there's an argument that today the same tactics wouldn't be successful because we have video, we have internet streaming today. Anybody that's trying to
That's a very good point.
Anybody that's trying to be an agent provocateur, they can be outed. I was talking the other night on the show about if you're in a crowd of people at some sort of activist event, you suspect somebody there as an agent, you can always make a sign up with the word cop and an arrow pointing downward and stand behind the person with it, just to give everybody a heads up on who the bad guy is. But also when you're doing activism, and you're doing activism publicly, whether it's a secession movement or it's just going out and smoking pot in Central Square, as we've done in the past here in Keene, New Hampshire, you can't control who shows up. If it's public activism, that's one of the problems with doing public activism, is anybody can show up and they can say and do anything they want, and then some people will look at that and they'll think, oh, well, they're all together, and because that guy's a bad person, they're all bad people. That's just something that you have to deal with, and the best way to deal with it is to let people know who come into your group of activists who start talking about violence, who start advocating for violence. Let those people know this is not acceptable discussion, that it won't be tolerated, and that they need to change how they approach things, or they will find themselves on the outs of that particular movement. Besides communicating and trying to use your, whatever numbers of peaceful people you have against these folks peacefully, that's really all you can do. You can't stop somebody from showing up, pulling out a gun, and firing at the feds. I mean, ultimately, there's not much you can do besides just trying to dissuade people.
I think that when New Hampshire secedes, that it will be a very big PR job. I think that we would need as a state to come together and have a cohesive, peaceful message that we have no intention of doing doing anything violent.
So, Will, you're the host of the morning show on WVFT 93.3 there in Tallahassee. Are you guys covering this issue in the mornings? What's happening? What's the response from your listeners?
We talk about it to a certain extent. We're more of a typical morning show format. We try to get everybody up to speed as to what's going on around them. The manipulation of the two-party election system that's upcoming in the 2014 election. We believe, like you guys do, if you're going to try and run within the parties, why try and step out? We've got a great libertarian governor candidate here, Adrian Wiley. The problem is he ran on the libertarian ticket. He didn't try and take Rick Scott on in the Republican primary, which I think he would have had a great opportunity to do. Rick Scott and Charlie Crist are not they're demonstrating typical two-party system manipulation control over the system. And you see a guy like Adrian Wiley fall through the cracks. Our only hope is he's got a big October upcoming debate. He's polling at 17%.
The libertarian.
That's incredible for a libertarian.
For Florida, that's also incredible. Yes. I'm a Florida native, so I know how bad it is there.
17%. Win Quinnipiac and the big dogs put him in the polls. He's getting between 11 and 17%.
I'm very interested in seeing how that pans out. And Will, anytime you want a Free Talk Live host on your show to chit chat, don't hesitate to reach out. Get in touch with
you guys. Yeah, I've got my producer working on it on the back.
Thanks,
channel.
brother.
Guys,
I appreciate it, man. We're coming up. Still, the numbers are rolling in from Scotland. Nothing confirmed yet, but certain voting locations, we're starting to see how things are panning out. Some are in favor of yes, some in favor of no. East Lothian, the no camp, is confident of a comfortable victory, looking like a 60-40 split. Turnouts are typically at around 85 to 90% at the various different polling locations.
Wow.
The Guardian has just this great site, this great page up right now at theguardian.com, where literally as updates come in, it's just bouncing in new updates constantly. So for those of you who want to follow along, that's a great way to do it. We started a story in the earlier portion of the program from Slate.com about the U.S. Side of the secession movement, and I wanted to continue that here because it's relevant to the discussion. Here's the rest of the story. They're talking to Kirkpatrick Sale from the Middlebury Institute. He says, that's an organization for Vermont secession. He says, I don't know what will be sufficient to really move people towards secession. His Middlebury Institute has held multiple conferences on secession. He's published books about the idea, full of arguments that have bounced right off the skulls of average Americans. Sale continues, quote, if the condition of this country is as it is today is not enough to make people want to leave it, I can't tell you what would. If you have no faith in your central government, if Congress has the support of 10 to 12% of the public, if the president, and that's on a good day, if the president's approval numbers are close to 30% in some states, I don't know why this resentment doesn't translate into secession, which is the only reliable, peaceful way to make change. And of course, I agree completely. Other secessionists are more hopeful. Start with the Texas nationalist movement, which has been in close contact with the Scottish nationalists for years and which is currently using the referendum as a PR and recruitment tool. We are here in Texas where Scotland was many years ago, says Daniel Miller, the president of the Texas group. He says people continually told the Scots that this can't happen, that this is a pipe dream. And then the people of Scotland put their minds to it. That's been one of the major recurring themes of our message, that this is not just about Texas independence, it's about how independence and self-determination are global trends of our time. Miller concedes that his Texans need to do far more of the legwork in math than Scottish nationalists did to come up with proof, though they know it to be true, that an independent Texas would be wealthy and energy independent. But Miller has led the Texas secessionists since 2001, from a time a Texan sat in the Oval Office, not ideal for recruitment, to the momentum-building reign of President Obama. His experiences and the struggles of blue state secessionists have echoed in Scotland. Scottish voters roundly rejected the Conservative Party in 2010's national elections, giving them only one of 59 parliamentary constituencies. The Scottish National Party's leader, Alex Salmond, has promised Scots a social democratic future for Scotland, one in which the Tories could never rule them. And it's worked. The yes vote finally surged as Labour voters became warmer to it. American secessionists realize they need the luck of time and place. The Alaskan Independence Party has performed most strongly when voters have been angriest with the feds. Cascadia Now, a campaign to create a new country from the greenest parts of the Pacific coast, has attracted the most attention when it's looked like Republicans were going to ruin everything for Greater Portlandia. Brandon Letzinger, the director of Cascadia Now since 2005, says, quote, "The most powerful moment we've had was when the government shut itself down. We've never gotten more hits on our webpage than when that happened. If they can't get it together, maybe we need something else. So if the Republicans sweep both the House and Senate, then I really expect our momentum will pick up and take off." But it's unfortunate that it seems like it's the political moves of the nation state in the U.S. that move people one direction or another towards and away from secession, as was pointed out.
Right.
The Vermont secessionist movement had strength when Bush was in office, but died off when Obama got elected.
Which is really sad, because it should be a renaissance of the mind. People should
not
be
based on politics.
For me, it does give me hope that liberals, though, are also for secession.
Yes.
All right, because usually most people who think secession are small government libertarians or conservatives of some sort, but the fact that there's socialists and Democrats and stuff like that that also don't like the federal government and want to leave it, that also gives me hope that there can be a
uniting force.
A uniting force, yes.
Ian, I've been thinking about this for a while in my argument for against that fear that people feel, and I can honestly tell you that I have come to the conclusion through the past few hours and thinking about it that I am actually more afraid to remain part of the United States than I am to secede, because of the violent minions that they send out with their shiny badges, and they hurt us every day, and they steal from us every day.
I had a crazy story in show prep about how the military surplus equipment that's been given to police departments are now being given to school police as well. So Bearcats and bomb making things or whatever it is they're giving out.
I mean, we'll go through a period. We may go through a period where the federal government wants to attack us. There may even be violence.
I feel like we're under attack every day.
But yes, and that's what I'm saying. But if we do this, we can end it forever.
We're working on it.
We could end it for always. And instead of living under this regime where we have to deal with it every day, we can get it over with, part ways, hopefully peacefully, but if violently, do the violence now and get out. And that way we don't have to deal with violence for our children.
Yeah. The Scottish referendum, according to Slate, is drawing up a great game plan to use in a future Cascadia 2020 campaign, says Letzinger. Ideally, it would happen in some Ted Cruz-run dystopia from which liberals could not wait to flee, but dystopia may not be enough to shake people loose from the United States. For a little while in the Bush years, a group called Christian Exodus attempted to gather a critical mass of believers to build a new society and country out of a red state. They tried South Carolina for a while, then Idaho. Then they moved on to a campaign of personal secession at home and nullification of federal laws in the states. Ask Christian Exodus's old director Keith Humphrey and he'll tell you secession was never going to work. He says, quote, "The people who could have made it work had places to live, commitments at home. They couldn't move. The people willing to move were the kind that had nothing left to lose. They'd already burned bridges with family and friends. They were not very employable. They were not ready for self-government because many of them were getting government benefits." He laughs at the debacle, saying that all the people who love liberty and they're on food stamps. How do you reconcile that ideal with that reality? If all the people involved have socialistic mindsets, then you can't tell them they're going to be better off independent. Now, have you guys heard of this Christian Exodus group before?
No, I've never heard of this before.
So a little bit of a history lesson for you. Christian Exodus
Love it.
literally took the text from the Free State Project website, copied it over to their website, changed a few words, like, adding in Christians, because it's all about Christians separating from the U.S. But they failed, ultimately, like every other Free State Project copycat group has pretty much failed miserably. But the Free State Project's making this work, and it's not a Christian movement. There are atheists and Christians and Muslims and all kinds of people involved in the Free State Project. It's not this niche. The niche, if anything, of the Free State Project is that people here believe in freedom. And so to use the failed Christian exodus as an example of why this isn't going to work, well, it is going to work. It is working here, and the Free State Project is leading the way.
So I think you made another really good point. I noticed something while you were reading that about, people being willing to get involved once they had nothing left to lose. And I think that secession is inevitable. And I think all states are going to consider that because of the fact that the dollar is failing. We're in economic decline. Eventually, no one's going to have anything to lose because everybody's going to be poor, and so why not at that point? So
at least one thing that secessionist movement around the world have as an option now, as a tool, is that they can use Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. Like, there's a lot big arguments. Always like, well, who's going to issue the currency? What would they use for money?
Crypto anarchy.
But we got Bitcoin.
Problem's been solved.
That's already solved.
John's with us in Charleston, West Virginia, listening to WVTS. Hey, John, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, man. I think there's two things that secession really needs before it can happen.
Okay.
And that is national debt. I mean, that problem's got to be.
That's not my debt.
Yeah, that's not my debt. I want out of that.
That's their debt.
Wants to say, but I mean, unless you want to avoid like a civil war, I mean, you really think people's going to let people back out?
And, I do think that.
I do.
Let me leave.
You don't think
am I free to go?
You don't think the USSR had national debt at the time that they broke apart?
Right. I mean, I'm saying, right. I'm not saying that we should pay it all, tax it all to us. I mean,
don't include me in that.
Back away, walk away from it, man.
To...
There's no obligation. Unfortunately, we're out of time here tonight, John. Call back tomorrow if you want to discuss this further. I wish we had more time for you, but we don't. Thank you for the call tonight. And Lauren, objectivistgirl.com.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Rob.
RebelLoveShow.com and also VRebel.com is my personal site.
VRebel?
VRebel, just started it.
Oh, cool. I'm looking forward to checking that out. All right, we'll see you tomorrow night online in the meantime at freetalklive.com. And go Scotland!
Go Scotland!
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.